Welcome to Foodytime. I'm Jay Fettigan, and in this episode, I talk with a friend, Naomi Klein. Naomi and her business partner started one of the very first food trucks in Boston. They expanded to include catering services and ultimately opened up a restaurant. And then the pandemic hit, and they had to make a lot of adjustments and pivots and change the direction that they were going. Naomi tells this fascinating story, and then she'll fill us in on where she is today. Enjoy. You ready to start?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'm not. I'm going to have a little sip of wine.
Oh, wine. All right. Yes.
It's wine o'clock somewhere.
Sounds good.
If you want to you can go get yourself a glass of wine. We have time.
Because when in Rome. So I got to open this one up.
There you go. It's all right. Looks like a nice rosé.
Yes, this is Minuti. And when I went to Paris a couple of summers ago, a friend of mine who lives in the south of France came up to meet me. And it was summertime. And she was obsessed with this rosé. And in the, I don't know, 48 hours that we spent together, the two of us, at every cafe we went to, which was a lot,
Mm-hmm.
we had this one. And I got really into it. And then sadly, I come home. And of course, I couldn't find it here. Then
Right.
just the other day, I saw it in the store.
Naomi, cheers.
Cheers. That's a good idea.
Naomi, welcome to Foodytime. I'm so glad that you're here so we can talk about. You've had a lot of experiences in food in the food business. Did you think that working in the food business or food was going to be so important in your life?
Absolutely not. I didn't think that because although it was one of my first jobs that I ever had, not in fact, my very first job,
Hmm.
count as babysitting or something like that,
Right.
was my start in the food industry. So I scooped ice cream. I worked at Bruegger's Bagels. I worked at a number of cafes and restaurants all through high school and college, usually front of house, usually
Mm-hmm.
whether it was counter service, barista, wait staff, hostess, the whole thing. But
Yeah.
no, I thought I was going to do very different things. And I did do very different things for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I never thought I would be in the food industry as a career. Yeah.
Uh-huh. But you did study right in um
So I went, but before I went to culinary school, I had albeit brief, but I had about like a 4-year period as a career where I was teaching preschool and working with horses and
mm-hmm.
living in Arizona.
Mm.
And so I moved to New York, which was always the plan
Mm-hmm.
because that's where everything is. And I moved to New York and I immediately just got a job, my backup always waiting tables.
Uh-huh.
I was just, working random jobs when I had this epiphany about going to culinary school
Huh.
because I wanted to learn different kinds of cooking. And so I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool to go to a culinary school that had, different, like, not just your classic French stuff, something different. And I found this place called Natural Gourmet Institute.
Hmm.
And it was a mostly vegetarian cooking school with a big emphasis on health and wellness. It was awesome. It was the best time. I loved going there. I loved learning. We learned classic stuff, but then we learned alternatives. So
Mm-hmm.
start with your basics, your mother sauces and so forth, but
Hmm.
then you would learn a vegan version of that or gluten-free
Mm-hmm.
or like so it was a well-respected place, especially in New York City. And they had relationships with a lot of restaurants there. So I was able to get a really um, coveted internship working with Anita Lowe,
Mm-hmm.
who had this restaurant called Anissa.
Hmm.
And Anita Lowe, if you didn't know,
Mm-mm.
chef, and she beat Mario Batali,
Huh.
and she was awesome. And that was one of the best places I've ever worked at. Was there.
And you said that you had an epiphany. Uh, was there an event? Did something actually happen? Is there a story around that?
the epiphany was really kind of like, well, everyone needs to eat.
Mhm.
So I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go to culinary school and I'm going to make that my career.
Wow. What year did you start it was the early 2000, 2010, 2011? When did you start the dining car?
Dining car, that was the very beginning of we started late 2010 and opened in 2011.
And how did you get from uh, this uh, education from the
Full Gourmet Institute. Yeah, so I was working in restaurants in New York after I graduated,
Mhm.
and that was all going fine. And then, you know Isaac, my now 18-year-old son.
Yes.
Well, he decided to make an appearance, not in my plan for things, but and so we ended up, I was married at the time, we ended up moving here to Boston to be closer to my family when Isaac was about 8 months. So at some point before I gave birth, I stopped working in restaurants.
Mhm.
I knew it wasn't something I was going to be able to go back to at least anytime soon. And it really didn't offer most places, a good schedule for a parent.
Right.
So when he was, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3, I started doing private cooking, where I was just hired out to different families and would
Hmm.
do whatever they wanted. I worked for one family that wanted vegan raw food, another one that just wanted like gourmet meals every week.
Hmm.
And it was fine, but it was really not, it's a lot of work, and people will still raise their eyebrows at how much it costs. But
Hmm.
you're basically customizing everything for these clients, and it's um it's hard to actually make money because you could spend an entire day, shopping and prepping and cooking, and then after you get reimbursed for the food, the groceries, you might have made, I don't know, I'm trying to think, $100 or
I
something.
would say not even tip money, right?
Yeah, it's not great.
Right.
So I was talking to my dad at the time because I had started seeing this food truck scene, which was at the time more in California and Miami,
Hmm.
warm weather places, which do make sense.
Hmm.
Didn't have anything here in Boston at the time. And I said to my dad, I said, I think it'd be cool to have a food truck. And I had this thought that a food truck would allow me to have, like, I could be a working parent and
Hmm.
still, have my weekends and have, evenings, because I just imagined this like busy lunch situation where people were working.
Yeah.
That's what I had sort of seen when I had been in other cities, but it's not like that isn't true as it turns out at all. A food truck business go, you have to have that thing on the road as much as possible. You have to
Right.
take advantage of catering, which is always weekends,
Hmm.
um, and festivals and events. And, so it wasn't what I imagined.
Hmm.
He thought it was a good idea. And he was a retired businessman at the time, but he thought it was worth investing in.
Hmm.
She brought in his former business partner and also hooked me up with a friend of theirs, David Harnick, who became my business partner.
Hmm.
And so I had met him before we went into business together. I was
Huh.
so excited about going into business and doing this that it didn't even occur to me that I should like meet the guy and see if we could. Not, it was just like boom. As many times in my life, I have done these kind of decisions where I just jump in, don't look, don't think, and go.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, it's worked out pretty good. I recommend it, but I have no regrets. David's one of my closest friends now.
Hmm.
So with the business acumen of my dad and his business partner, we spoke to food truckers in other cities because there was nothing in Boston. We remember we spoke to
Hmm.
food truckers in Washington, D.C., a little bit in New York, tried to get a sense of things. And then we started working with the city. At the time, it was Mayor Menino, and
Hmm.
we helped actually create the Boston food truck um, system. There's like a lottery where for the public city sites, and if you're in the city, you'll see signage and parking spots, and it says food truck parking. That's because of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Were you doing more of the retail, more of the customer work, and David more of the cooking?
Um, at the time, we were pretty small when we first started. We did everything.
Hmm.
In the early days, I remember my dad acting as a cash handler.
Uh-huh.
But no, like David and I would go into, we had rented space at um, a commissary in Jamaica Plain that was called um, Crop Circle Kitchen.
Hmm.
And so in the early days, you know, David was always the chef in terms of the menu. Like I would say I was chief taster. Um,
That's a good job.
produce the food, you know, but the
Mhm.
recipes, the menu were coming from him. And I had influence and you know, I felt so strongly about the health and, you know,
Hmm.
the vegetarian component. And so I was like, we have to have vegetarian things on our menu.
Hmm.
That was where one of our iconic sandwiches came from, which was the honey truffle goat cheese sandwich,
Mm. Hmm.
was from this push to have something vegetarian on the menu. No, we just did everything all together at the time. And it wasn't until we grew bigger that we sort of, you know, split our responsibilities
Hmm.
but for the longest time, up until we opened the restaurant, I was overseeing food production in our commissary.
Oh.
So I had learned the recipes, I knew the
Hmm.
process, I had the cooking, you know, experience, like I
Hmm.
knew technique and so forth. I
Right.
just wasn't necessarily coming up with the menu. I shouldn't like, I should give myself a little credit and say I did help. You know, we had catering jobs where we'd have to create a brand new menu out of thin air.
Hmm.
I would come up with ideas for that.
Because you had a huge amount of food experience before that, working in restaurants and.
Funny
Uh,
because I guess it, especially in the early days, because he was the more experienced, he'd been running his own catering business at that point. He would
hmm.
for um, some really fancy places in Boston, and I was a little intimidated. I remember I didn't know this guy,
Right.
and he was working for um, Au Soleil and Celle de la Terre and
Hmm.
heading up their catering division. And I was like, whatever you think.
Right. And Les Pallier, did I see that?
Yeah, Les Well, yeah, yeah. So
Hmm.
um so I really did sort of acquiesce to whatever he thought.
Hmm.
His general we ended up coming up with the tagline elevated comfort food.
Hmm.
Um,
Nice.
but David just loves bold flavors and he loves rich foods and he does love French. And French, I would say there is a richness that runs through French food.
Hmm.
Usually have it in small little servings, but we're in America, man, and we make big sandwiches. And so, you know, some of our things would be kind of over the top. And my influence, if you will, would be balance.
Hmm.
So, you know, we'd make a catering menu for somebody, and I'd say there isn't one green thing on there. Like vegetable, there isn't a green thing, there isn't anything that isn't drowning in a sauce, like
Hmm.
mix it up. So
But that's what makes partnerships work, is
yes.
if there's overlap but also differences. And it sounds like things were going along kind of all gangbusters for a while, and then the pandemic hit. And could you
Yeah.
talk about that sort of a huge hole in the road?
Yeah. So prior to the pandemic, the dining car was in the best place it's ever been. Um, we had we had gotten into running these large scale events where we would go and we were the event runners of it. So we would hire out numerous food trucks for these multi-truck events at the
Mhm.
convention center. So there might be a conference from, say, HubSpot, and there were going to be, you know, 20, 30,000 attendees, and they didn't have the infrastructure in the convention center to feed all those people.
Right.
So we would be hired by HubSpot, and we'd then get 20, 22 food trucks that were going to be there. We'd jury the menus. We'd make sure all the permitting was in place. We'd
Hmm.
handle drinks, which was like thousands and thousands of drinks. And this was an amazing business. We were going to start focusing more on that. And
Hmm.
that was definitely, you know, in an industry where profit is very hard and you're constantly chasing it and trying to save every penny where you can.
Right.
Particular one, the events and catering was like where we saw like this is where we're making money, this is where we should concentrate our
Hmm.
efforts on. And then the pandemic hit.
Hmm.
And I remember that very clearly because we're a food truck. So
Hmm.
we're going to be pulling up where people were actually going to come to us. Like we had done large scale events. Nobody was gathering. We weren't going to be doing festivals and conferences and so forth. Or
Right.
go and vent for lunch on the Greenway, but you have to have people going to their offices for that.
Hmm.
Certainly all the fast food, fast casual concepts, pizza and so
Hmm.
forth, be fine. So we tried so many
Well,
things.
they also already had a delivery infrastructure in place. I would imagine that that was made the big difference initially. Is that everybody gets pizza delivered. Everybody gets Chinese food delivered or whatever. I imagine it's difficult to create an infrastructure like that.
I mean, there are, of course, the apps, the third-party apps, but they gouge the restaurants. You
Right.
can pay as much as 30, 35%. But no, we did the big word then was pivot. So we pivoted.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we did was we decided we were going to make prepared foods. We were going to do meals that were all ready to go. They were going to be frozen, so you could put them in their freezer, you could put them in your fridge. They could go right from the freezer to the microwave,
Yeah.
go into our kitchen, and we'd do this massive production, and we'd make, four different meals, and each meal would have, three or four components, and then you're
Mhm.
making hundreds of them and freezing them. So it was like massive production, like we're our own factory.
Right. Right.
And all really tasty. Like, we did a pollo a la brasa with a black beans and rice and grilled zucchini. We took our meatballs, our famous Mama's meatballs, and did a dinner with the meatballs and a ricotta pasta and like a roasted broccoli. And we had this awesome curried lentil dish with all kinds of vegetables and jasmine rice that
Mm.
was gluten-free and vegan.
Mm.
And and I mean, we made so many of those and I was so excited about them and they looked beautiful and we didn't sell a lot. Wah, wah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mm.
it wasn't going to sustain us. It wasn't going to pay for our staff.
Right.
We were just trying to think like, how can we retain our staff? How can we can keep moving? And meanwhile, on the side, I'm applying for every kind of loan or grant that we're eligible for.
Right.
And thank goodness, because we did get some of those. And then the big one that definitely changed the whole direction for us was there was the Restaurant Revitalization Fund.
Hmm.
And I applied for that one, and everyone was hoping to get that grant, but you were just hearing, in the news and so forth, like, nope, they fulfilled that grant so quickly. There were so many people who applied. The feeling was that nobody was going to get it. But I felt like, I was like, we're going to get it. I worked so hard on that application. I dotted every I and I crossed every T. And I was like, I did everything. There isn't one thing that can come back and say you're missing it. And we got it. That was like life changing kind of money. It was like,
Hmm.
we could open a restaurant.
Hmm.
So that's what we did. And we started looking for commercial space. And we ended up finding our space in Newton Highlands.
Yeah, and a beautiful space, by the way, with windows all around and.
We were thinking of getting like a somewhat small space. And then
Hmm.
we were shown this 2,200 square feet place.
Hmm.
Like, ooh. And again, first time restaurateurs had no clue what we're doing. So we look at this thing and we see, oh, it's already been a restaurant. It's been a restaurant a number of times. It has equipment. It
Hmm.
has everything set up. It has tables and chairs. It's turnkey, or so
Hmm.
we thought, but it was not turnkey. And we were really trying to do it with a pretty small budget. And we're thinking, well, we already have all this equipment. We don't need to get a few more pieces. So we had this idea that we'd be open in maybe 2 to 3 months and it
Hmm.
wouldn't be much. And we were so, so, so wrong.
Oh no. Well, it's hard because you were already preparing large quantities of food. You knew how to do that. You already had the everything in place on the food end of it, I assume. But it's everything else.
Yeah, we were really familiar and really neat because that was one of my responsibilities with, working with all the different cities and municipalities and getting all the different accreditations or permits or certifications that you need to be there. But a restaurant's a whole nother ballgame. And
Mm-hmm.
in particular, something that would never have occurred to us is that the existing business that had been there before us had, I think, sort of been grandfathered in with certain stuff, and code had changed. And as the new business coming in that wasn't going to just continue that name,
Mm-hmm.
we were responsible to bring everything up to code. And there was a lot that was not in code.
And um, the food was terrific, and it seemed like you had a good steady clientele. Um,
It was a very slow start, actually. And you came, I think, probably on a weekend day once we'd
mm,
been open for a little while. And it always had a lovely feel on the weekend
mm,
because even though it was quite big, the seating and people liked to, we had imagined a place that was really kind of going to be a takeout. Like, oh, we have these tables and chairs on this one side,
mm-hmm.
split down the middle. So that's there if people want it. But we had imagined that it was going to be like similar in a way to our truck where people just are going, coming and going and not sticking around. And our menu led itself to that. I mean, we expanded
Mm-hmm.
our menu. It was a lot more than what the food truck had done. We had sandwiches and salads and soups. And then we had um, some things coming out of the fryer. We made excellent chicken tenders and French fries and cauliflower. And then we had our prepared foods, which were in that glass case.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You had a bakery too, didn't you? Do desserts and bagels and muffins, things like that as well.
oh my God, so much of that time before we opened, when we were waiting for permitting to get sorted out,
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of research and development, R&D on the bakery. I mean, we did Bialys. Do you know Bialys?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the amount of Bialys that David and Reeve worked on to get to that point where I would have to say it was the perfect Bialy. Like, I had not had a Bialy that good since New York. You don't see them in every bagel shop. So
Well,
this is
I've never found a Bialy anywhere in the Boston area, so it's
so in any case, yes, we had a full bakery program, and I assumed that everyone would know that we were making it all. Like, here's this
mhm,
gorgeous glass thing and all these beautiful pastries, and
right.
people would say, "Where are they from?" Or "Do you make them here?" I'm like, "Yeah, we make everything here." Like that. I literally wrote it on the glass. We make everything here. People would stop asking because it just didn't even occur to me. Yeah, there are places that will make an order, and or there are places that will get a par baked item and then finish it off. But
Mhm,
and we had a full coffee program. We had uh, a La Marzocca espresso machine manual. We had to learn that. We had to teach that, make all of the different espresso based drinks. So we had so much going on under this one roof because we had our line doing the a la carte menu. We had the bakery. We had the coffee. We had the prepared foods. Then we had retail foods. Plus, this is the same place where in the back we're making food for the truck and for any catering that's coming through.
right, because the food truck is still active through all this.
Yes, it was. And it was like 17 balls in the air. It was insane.
Mm, right.
We were slow. Then we started getting busier on the weekends, and so that was great. But as I was starting to say earlier, you that restaurant would fill up, but if you actually counted how many people were there, and
Mm-hmm.
then some of those people loved the atmosphere so much they hang out for hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it could have an air of success while not bringing in a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we had such effusive and fanatic customers, guests, fans, whatever you want to call them, because
Right.
I mean, we did get a great reputation, but it was like a little local reputation. You
Yeah.
know, we get TikTok famous, which I say that because um, at the same time that we were opening our restaurant, Lacan was opening up their bakery
Mm-hmm.
that do those croissants, the filled croissants, the square croissants. And a TikToker went there who clearly had a massive following, and that place blew up. And I'm not saying they don't have good product, they have
Right.
croissants. Um, but it started to become this thing where I'd be driving into work and I'd see this line out the door and I'd be a little sad. I'd be like, well, I guess if they get tired of waiting, they can come to us.
That's a good way to look at it.
It did
Um,
that a little bit, but we still were kind of flying under the radar. That place, that location, to be truly successful would need to be a destination, would need to have something like that, like
Right.
get that reputation for being the best place to get XYZ,
Hmm.
word spread like wildfire, and get the folks in there. And even so, that might not be enough. You really, we have started to realize, like, honestly, to make this thing work, it's going to come down to the catering. We need to really get the word out to all these folks that we can do your catering, whether it's an office lunch or your daughter's wedding. Like, we can do
Hmm.
it all, and catering really is where it's at.
Right.
It's a really different feel. Like, if you're used to working in restaurants and you then start doing catering, it's completely different. The the flow, the vibe, everything is so different. It's You do all this preparation, and then
Hmm.
you put it away and you bring it somewhere and you set it up. And there's a lot of things you can't do that you can do when you're firing a dish at a restaurant. Like,
Right.
there's so many things when you're working on a restaurant line that, yeah, it's not all made right from the moment that you order it. Many things are prepared in advance.
Hmm.
There's that last, 5 minutes of whatever it is that comes from off the grill, out of the fryer, from the oven, whatever it is. And, we had a truck with a lot of great equipment on it. But again, when you're serving 100 plus people,
Right.
you can't be counting on everything coming out that way. So
The
it's
variables are so immense in a situation like that. If something's 5 minutes late for some reason and it throws everything off schedule, it can change the way your food tastes or how long it's cooked or, I mean, whereas if you're just have the it being cooked right there and you're serving it to people in the restaurant, you reduce the variables by a thousandfold, I would think at least.
yeah, it's so different just at its core. And I prefer restaurants.
Hmm.
I just love the flow, the cadence. You'll have your rush, you'll have your preparation when it's usually you got your crew, people are having a drink, whether whatever that is. Some people it's coffee, 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 and some people it's water all day.
Hmm.
You're having you're joking, you're in a good mood, everyone's having a good time, you're making food because pretty much mostly the people who are doing this do enjoy making food. I mean,
Right.
everyone, but mostly. And then you got to be ready. You have to be prepared for that busy time. And then it slows down and you break things down, you clean up, you prep for the next day, you leave your station. And I love that. That's a nice, and you kind of never don't have something to do, which is good. You're always busy.
Right.
Catering, that the intensity of it, especially when you're doing, like, if you care, and we really cared, you're
Hmm.
big special day, and you have to get 150 guests served within like a 10-minute period, and it's their wedding. Like, the pressure that we put on ourselves, that I certainly felt, is insane.
Hmm.
If you weren't being meticulous with your preparation, and especially with catering in a food truck, whatever, what if we go and do these beautiful farms out in the country somewhere, because we did a lot of outdoor events, we were a food
Hmm.
truck.
Right.
If you didn't have that thing with you, you weren't going to be able to get it. There wasn't going to be a store around the corner where you could get it, whatever it could be. It could be that someone didn't bring another box of fry oil on the truck, or it could be that we didn't have squeeze bottles. It didn't matter
Hmm.
what it was, you probably weren't going to find it locally. And so it was very interesting what we would pull off, with the different snags that we hit, because it always happens. I mean, even
Do you have a funny story that you can share? Was it something in particular that maybe stands out?
I don't know if it's funny, but um, David will never forget the one wedding where we kind of ran out of food. Um, so, and the thing that I will say is that was on me. This was an early wedding, and I think, reacting to the fact that David would always over prepare. We'd go just fill up, and at the end of the event would come, and we'd have all this food that we had specially prepared for this event.
Hmm.
It wasn't something that we were going to sell the next day on our lunch vending. And he always felt very strongly about it, but it was too much. And so I was trying to correct that, and I overcorrected.
Oh no.
So I don't remember what it was, but the vegetable that was being served was something that was getting roasted we had this giant convection oven on our first food truck.
Hmm.
And so what was happening is I had worked out by weight what we needed, but then everything is shrinking because it's getting roasted in the oven. And so
Right.
it just doesn't look right. It's not enough on the plate. We have to do whatever. I think it was maybe asparagus, like four asparagus, five asparagus wasn't doing it. You needed to do more for it to look right. And we're going through it. We're going through it. And we're running out. And so I think we had spinach on the truck. So then we saute all the spinach, boom. And then we ran out of that. And it was like that. We kept finding another, like, we're just, thankfully, these people were so drunk that they didn't care at the end. I mean, Dave would probably disagree. That one haunted him for literal years. To this day, I think that wedding probably took place, and I want to say like 2013.
So it seems that this story ends the way a lot of stories, restaurant stories, sadly go, regardless of how much effort and ingenuity and reaction.
We were growing. We were definitely growing. And I feel like so proud and so good about what we did and built there. And we had like beloved customers, just who really huge fans, but it was not fast enough. And so, and the food truck was off the road because we had also real challenges in finding independent people to run that. So we had gone through two food truck managers during the season.
Hmm.
And towards, the end of October, the truck comes off the road. And so that's not bringing in any money. The restaurant is growing, but not fast enough. And we kind of just we're at a place where, like, well, we have a choice to be made. So what the choice is, to secure another loan in order to sustain us for another 6 months to a year.
Mm.
Um, Doing that without being 100% clear, is this going to be something that we just add to our debt? Are we positive we can pay that off? Like, where's the business plan with the projections that show that this is going to pan out?
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think we bit off a really big um, bite. And
Right.
so, when we opened the food truck, we weren't, the oldest people in the game, but we weren't the youngest even then. It's a young person's game, food trucking.
Right.
So by this point, it was like trying to draw those reserves of energy like you had when you just had that crazy stamina and you could just go, 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 go all the time.
Hmm.
I couldn't pull it out. David was struggling to pull it out. I mean, no, he couldn't either.
Yeah.
So
So when did you close the doors of the restaurant?
we had our last service on December 16th, 23.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Hmm.
Closed our doors when we did because I had done the math and I was like, if we close our doors now, we can at least give our staff some severance pay and
Hmm.
heads up and say, thank you, and send them off with a little bit of money in their pockets.
So have you had enough distance now to feel one way or another? I mean, it must be a combination of happy and sad, thinking about where you are.
It's definitely a combination of that. I am absolutely 100% clear that it was the right decision. I just know that I wanted to have more of a work-life balance. I wanted to have my summers back, have my weekends, not be called in to deal with emergencies, etc.
Hmm.
And I want to spend more time like building relationships in my life. I
Hmm.
became a single mom at the same time that we started the food truck. And so I had a 5-year-old just starting kindergarten and a brand new business that I had never done before. And it took a lot. There were sacrifices on all sides. There are a lot of things I feel bad about. There are things I missed.
Hmm.
Make up for that now. Like, he's 18, so here we are. But I do think, you know what? It's time to It's time to have a little more time for myself.
Looking back, also, there are many people who are either in the position that you were in at the beginning or thinking about it. What would you say to them, knowing what you know now?
Oh, I mean, we've hired so many people like that. And so we would always say, if you're especially considering starting a food truck and you've never worked on one, you should work on one in the middle of summer on a very busy day. I mean, I think first and foremost, you have to love food. You have to have a real passion to come into this business. And you should really know what it's like to work in one. So if you have cooking experience, great, but then go work on a food truck and learn how to service a generator and learn how to deal with all the things that will come your way, because that's a big part of it. You have to understand, you have to know, like, is this part of my personality? I like being that, having 17 hats. I like being um the person that can juggle all this, because and that's any, whether you're thinking about opening a restaurant as well. I
Hmm.
think if you're thinking about opening a restaurant and you haven't worked in one, then you're crazy.
Right.
But I think, again, you have to love it. You have to have a great location. And one thing I would say that we've learned that I now advise people about, when you're looking for that space, you need to have your contractor, your plumber, your electrician, you need to understand all of the rules of that town and what would need to be done to bring it up to code if that exists. Like if you're renovating an existing space or even building out an empty brand new space, and you
Hmm.
need to know what these things are going to cost and how long it's going to take, and before you sign any lease. Because the only time that you have any negotiation room with your potential landlord is before you sign a lease, because that's your only chance. I always tell the people who are interested in opening a restaurant, like, this is your only time to negotiate. You'll never get to redo this. When it comes time to renew your lease, it's not going down, it's only going up.
Hmm.
So
Right.
those are like the sort of business practical things. But at the core, it's like you got to have a love. And so many people start a food business or start a food truck because they're really good at cooking something and their friends told them they're an amazing cook and they should open a restaurant.
Hmm.
Not a good reason to open a restaurant, because unfortunately, I don't agree with the adage that if you do something that you love, you never work a day in your life. Because if you do something that you love day in, day out, you may not love it anymore. It becomes work.
Hmm.
And since ending the dining car, the best thing about it for me, because I love food and cooking, is that I have been cooking so much again. I stopped cooking at home practically.
Hmm.
I would bring
Yep.
home a sandwich, or I'd, grab some soup, and then, I'd be good. So yeah, it really, if you have a hobby that you really love enjoying, just maybe keep it as a hobby, because then you'll continue to enjoy it and love it and get to do it at your pace and
Hmm.
without that ticker running through. Well, is this profitable? Do we need to cut that ingredient because it's too expensive?
Hmm. Right.
If you want to put in that fancy little touch, you can, because you're just serving your friends and it doesn't have to make you money.
But it sounds good. It sounds like your passion for cooking and food has been rekindled, which is a wonderful thing for people to know. That even if the business part doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that your passion will die. Well, this has been great. A really interesting story. And is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to get to? If we
The interesting sort of side effect of all this, even though I have my mom guilt and you know, things that I felt bad about missing, is that it was what Isaac grew up in. And when he became old enough, he started working on the food truck.
Mhm.
And in this past last summer, he went from working as a dishwasher in our restaurant to working as a barista, and he got really into it. And to the point where he started wondering, like, maybe this is my future. Maybe I'm going to go to culinary school. Maybe I'm going to be a chef. Well,
Hmm.
we don't know about that yet, but he did choose at his school, in your senior year, you have to choose a capstone project.
Mhm.
And he decided to make his capstone project that he would create a 7-course tasting menu. And that's what he's been doing. And he's been working. We went out and visited my cousin in Oregon, who has this beautiful farm to table restaurant called Celilo in Hood River,
Mm-hmm.
and did a stage with him, which is like a French term for in the restaurant industry where you train or you follow and work with a chef. And then he's been working with my business partner and getting practical uh, skills. And so he's built a beautiful menu. And I think if it were not for what he had been exposed to and around, coming up,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't have occurred to him. So I like that it's been inspiring to some extent, even though I felt bad about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
It really had an effect. And I think everybody should work in a restaurant at some point in their lives. I think
Yes.
everyone should wait a table and know what it's like to put all your effort in and be left 3 cents, like I think it's, a well rounding out experience. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm that's really all I would add is that, I'm glad that it has had a positive effect on Isaac.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end the interview. Thank you so much. It's been terrific and tremendously interesting.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was a terrific story that Naomi told, and it just proves the old adage my mother used to say: sometimes your decisions are made for you. Sounds like everything has worked out for Naomi and her former business partner, and for her son Isaac. Until next time, this is Jay Fettigan for Foodie Time.